How will NHI benefit citizens of South Africa?
So if you look at before 1990, white South Africans used the public health system. You've only saw the shift after 1990.
What's your message to voters come 29 May?
We must vote for our future, for the next 5 years, the next 30 years, so that we build a better country. And the ANC is about together we can do more.
Is Loadshedding going to return after elections? Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we take the complexity out of politics and make it palatable for you. With me, your host, TJ Maslela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be going into the manifesto of the African National Congress. And here to give us insight and make it palatable is none other than Mrs. Fébé Potgieter-Gqubule, who was the first female SG of the ANC Youth League, former advisor to the chairperson of the AU, deputy advisor, former deputy chair of the SABC board, and now the ANC head of policy and research. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So can you give us a bit of insight as to who you are, your journey, and how you became the head of policy and research at the ANC?
Wow, it's a long story. But I grew up in a small town in the Eastern Cape, and that really sparked my involvement in politics. And just the injustices that were so obvious, the difference between our schools and white schools. We had no water, electricity, etc., etc. So I got involved in high school in the early 1980s, COSAS, and then went to university, UWC, where my political involvement really grew. I served on the SRC UWC as a law student, and then the South African Youth Congress, the Youth League. I served in the diplomatic corps as ambassador to Poland after I left the Youth League. But also as Deputy Chief of Staff in the AU Commission in Addis Ababa. And then back to South Africa and back to the ANC headquarters.
Having the history of being the first female SG of the Youth League, what would you say it is then and now about the integration of youth and women into politics and also the state? I
mean, I come from a generation where often as a woman, you're the only woman in the room. When I was elected in 86 onto the SRC of UWC, I was the only woman on the SRC out of 14 people. When I was elected December 85 onto the National Executive Committee of ASASO, now SASCO, I was the only woman and serving in the position of gender coordinator. So I think that we've come a long way. We've come a long way because of the activism of women. But I also think that we've come a long way since 1994 because we've had deliberate policies to, in line with the Constitution, advance a non-sexist South Africa. I think for young people, my generation, we saw our mission to end apartheid. And that is why in the South African Youth Congress, we said freedom or death, victory is certain, and that we want freedom in our lifetime. And I think that that's what that youth generation, I think the post-1994 youth generation has a different mission. If you look at the fees must fall generation and the emphasis on decolonization. So each generation of youth define their mission.
Going into the manifesto, first priority is jobs and putting ANC to work.
South Africa to work.
Putting South Africa to work, my bad. Let's start with the progress ANC has made from 94, and then we'll go on to what ANC is going to do from here moving forward.
Okay. So I think that one need to look at the 6 priorities in the manifesto as interlinked. So, for example, the first priority is a jobs plan and putting South Africa to work. And then the second priority is industrialization and investing in infrastructure. If you look over the last 30 years, there's a close link between the fact that we have not gone a long way to transform the economy, and particularly on industrialization and building our manufacturing sector, beneficiation, means that our economy has not grown at the level, and therefore jobs haven't grown. So there's a link between the two. If you look at what we've done over the last 30 years with regards to jobs, so our labour market has grown, our labour force have grown because the population have grown. So in 1994, there were about just over 8.6 million people employed. Now we've got about 16.7 million. We lost about 2 million jobs during COVID, but most of that have been recovered. But every year we get about 500,000 to 700,000 new young people that enter the labour market, either from universities and TVETs or from school. So the rate at which we're creating jobs is not fast enough because the economy has not grown fast enough. So the jobs plan is really about threefold. It's firstly, to look at how do we create more jobs by meeting basic needs. So public works, the National Youth Service program that we're looking at expanding. And then, of course, 1 million jobs through SMEs, because SMEs is a big creator of employment. So you have a podcast, you need somebody that does the sound, that does the cameras. Yes, indeed. Somebody that maybe eventually you will have someone that advertise it on social media and push it. So small businesses create jobs. And this is why we say we want to focus on 1 million jobs in that. And then, of course, in the broader economy through industrialization, infrastructure development, to make sure that we advance, job creation. So that's really what priority one is about.
You mentioned, 1994, ANC came into power, got political power.
Yeah.
Economic power seems to have not come with that.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that is and why we haven't been able as a country to transfer the political power to economic power?
I mean, I think that you need to look at the history of why the majority of people are in the economic situation that they are. So, for example, before 1994, black people couldn't gather assets. So, I mean, for example, women couldn't be part of a pension scheme. So it means that intergenerational wealth that gets created through savings throughout your working life were not there for us. Assets. You couldn't buy houses and farms or whatever in 87% of the country because that was designated as white. Black people were restricted to 13% of the country. So I think that we're talking about 342 years of colonialism and apartheid, which was very much based on an economic foundation. So the process of, and I think that in that sense, political power is one aspect, and in some senses, it's easier. It's always a work in progress because we always need to build our democracy, but economic transformation is a much more harder because there's also a lot of vested interest. If you, for example, look at the issues of land reform, there's a lot of resistance to that, and hence the expropriation bill that we hope the president will sign before the elections.
What will the expropriation bill do?
Well, the Constitution makes provision for redistribution of land. But what it says is that it can be done for the public good, and land reform certainly is a public good. If you need houses, land for houses, it's a public good issue. If you need to build a railway, that's a public good issue. But what the Constitution says is that we need to put in place a law to enable us to set the parameters of what's defined as a public good, for example, and then how do you compensate people at a just level. And just compensation has two issues. The first one is that you need to look at the history of the land. How was the land? How did it get into your family's hand? One, so it will look at the historical injustice that's been created against black people. And then secondly, what have you done with the land since then? Have you developed it? So if you build a house or a factory, you will have to receive some compensation for that. But it's really to move away from this willing buyer, willing seller, where prices get ridiculously inflated. And it have made land reform over the last 30 years very difficult. But despite that, we now stand at 25% of land that's redistributed. It's still not at the level of 30% that we set out in the RDP in the first 30 years. But I think we haven't done too badly.
As you highlighted that there's a link between priority 1 and priority 2.
That's right.
Now, in terms of expanding the economy and building an inclusive economy, one of the critical components to it is the SOEs and cadre deployment.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what is cadre deployment and ANC stance on it?
Okay. So in 1994, when we came into power, you had over 80%, if not 90%, of your public service senior management, so probably from director upwards, but sometimes even lower, assistant director, were white and male. So in order to transform the public service, you had to bring in black people. And where were those black people? They were in the ANC. The ANC at the time got more than 60%. In order to carry out the policies that set out in the ANC manifesto, it started a process to make sure that it transformed the public sector. So your first Director General in the presidency was Professor Jakes Gerwel, an ANC member. I mean, there's no way that you can continue transforming the presidency with somebody from the old guard, because they didn't understand the need to build a non-racial South Africa and a non-sexist South Africa, and just being a government for everybody. So that's the origin of cadre deployment, the need to transform our society. There has been mistakes made, but I think that the principle, and that's what the Constitutional Court also said, in the case of Schreiber and the DA, what the Constitutional Court said is that the principle, all parties put forward a manifesto to the electorate. They then get elected. They then must ensure that they implement the promises and commitments that they made to the electorate. They do that through the executive, through parliament, but they also have to do that through the administration and other organs of the state.
Well understood, in principle. But now in reality, the SOEs haven't been profitable, one would say also mismanaged.
Yeah. I mean, SOEs must be sustainable. I don't think they should have a profit objective. I mean, for example, take SOEs, agencies, public agencies that I've worked on, like the SABC. I mean, the SABC must be sustainable. It must be able to build up a surplus in order to invest in producing better content, to develop its listenership, to make sure that it develops its journalists. So in a sense, SOEs, the reason why they are SOEs, because they're there for public good. And part of the public good, so therefore whatever profits they make gets reinvested into, meeting that developmental need. So if you look at Eskom over the last 30 years, before 1994, 56% of the population only had access to electricity. We now stand at, I think, over 90%.
Or 56%.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it means that over the public good mandate of Eskom over this last 30 years have been about making sure that all South Africans have access to electricity. Where I grew up in Humansdorp in Eastern Cape, my parents got electricity in 1996. And that's why my mum and dad continue to vote for the ANC, because, they got water, they got electricity after 1996. The challenge is that during the era of state capture, that developmental mandate was undermined through corruption. And I think that is what the Zondo Commission was about. And this is why, through a resolution of the ANC conference, we adopted that we should institute a special commission of inquiry, which was the Zondo Commission, to look into this matter. That, one, to unearth what happened, but also to make sure that it never happened to happen again. If you look at over the last 5 years, we're beginning to turn around Eskom. I think that the appointment of a dedicated Minister of Electricity to deal with that matter of electricity, the energy action plan, means that, issues like maintenance of power stations, the issue about their productivity or energy available factor, the issues such as dealing with corruption in Eskom, we're beginning to see the corner being turned. And similarly in Transnet as well. I mean, for example, last year you had this pile-up at our ports, also because of the war in Israel, because more ships now came through around Africa. The backlog was about, 20, 25 days, if not longer. In November last year, it's been reduced by more than 2/3 by January, February. So I think that one of the strengths of South Africa is the fact that we've got strong institutions. And so even though those problems happened, we're able to turn them around quickly. SAA, a year ago, we didn't have a national airline. You can now see that we've got more routes. SAA is beginning to hold its own in the aviation space. Similarly, we're turning around the Post Bank and the Post Office and a number of other SOEs. But I think that the issue is the lesson that we've learned from the state capture era, and luckily it wasn't, it was too long, but it ended, and we ended it, is that we need to be very vigilant about making sure that, one, the ANC act and governs in the interests of the people, and that's what our renewal is about, but also, secondly, that the state and its institutions are not captured by interests that's not in the interests of the people.
With regards to electricity, is load shedding going to return after elections?
Well, with the energy availability factor above 60% consistently since April, and we've now reached 70%, we think that a lot of the problems that have caused the load shedding are being addressed. An additional plus 6,000 megawatts through renewables have been added to the grid, and more are in the pipeline. There are plans around gas. So I think that what the energy availability plan is doing is to systematically work on the root causes that caused the problems of load shedding. So making sure that you don't just do maintenance when a power station breaks down, that you have planned maintenance every 3 months or every 6 months, whatever is required. But also, secondly, that you address productivity at the power station, that you address the corruption there and the management of how the power stations are managed, but also looking at how do you bring new energy sources onto the grid. The second aspect or third aspect of the energy availability plan or energy plan is to look at investing in our transmission, which is basically, there's generation, which is the power station and the solar panels and wind farms. And then there's how do you distribute the energy, and how do you transmit from, say, a solar farm to into the grid. Now, because we've been reliant on coal, it means that all our grids are linked to, our transmission facilities are linked to the coal and power plants. Now we need to extend that to the solar farms that's in the Northern Cape, the wind farms that's in the Eastern Cape and the Western Cape and in Free State. Just recently in the Free State, we opened a helium plant, gas helium plant. Yes. Well, but this is also contributing towards energy, not just for balloons. So that's an important, part of making sure that we have the energy mix. And then, of course, there's the discussion about nuclear. So that we do indeed have an energy mix. And I think that what the energy plan has done with the electricity minister is to put us back on track of meeting our objectives of making sure that we have an energy mix and that we invest in all aspects of our energy mix. So I think that we're well on the way to meet to address load shedding. I mean, what we will have to see is what happens when demand goes up, when the economy starts growing, and that's why we need to plan for that. And hence the investments in renewables, in other forms of energy, as well as our transmission grid. And then secondly, the test will come once we go into winter. But we're quite confident that we've gone a long way.
Now, with regards to the Zondo report, there were ANC members that were implicated, and that further feeds into the narrative of corrupt and old leaders when one sees, just a perception when one sees some of the lists coming back, those leaders coming back on the ANC list.
Okay.
What's ANC's position on that?
Okay. The ANC at the beginning or towards the end of last year adopted a whole range of electoral rules with a whole range of issues to deal with, making sure that we have a public representatives with integrity. So, for example, all our public representatives and about 1,800 people were nominated throughout the country. So all of them went through criminal checks. All of them went through checks in terms of whether they have been implicated in any corruption or charged, whether they have any disciplinary action against them, whether it's in the state or in the movement, whether they have any integrity commission reports against them and adverse finding. So on the basis of that, lots of people were removed from the list. The next step that was adopted by the Electoral Commission, which was an autonomous commission from the NEC, was that they interviewed all of our candidates. Because I think that on the one hand, you do these character checks and criminal checks, but on the other hand, you also need to know whether people are capable, whether they understand what's the role of a public representative. If you so happen to become an MEC or minister, do you understand the constitution, the laws of the country, the policies of the ANC, and what's your skill set? So all our candidates went through that. And then there were, in the final 900, there were people that had adverse findings by the Integrity Commission on them. They were taken off the list in provinces, on provincial lists, as well as on the national list. Let me just clarify that often when people say that, so what happened is that after the Zondo Commission handed over its list, the NEC then set up a special committee that was chaired by a member of the NEC at the time, that then had to look at how do we as an ANC and government implement the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. Now, amongst the things that were said is a list of people, everybody that were mentioned at the Zondo Commission. Now, you should remember that everybody that was mentioned or that gave testimony wasn't implicated in corruption, because we encourage our members to say that if you worked for Eskom and you've got information about somebody that did something wrong, or wrong things that happened, you must go and give testimony, and a number of people did that. The president and the national chairperson went there to present on behalf of the ANC. So the ANC then looked at those names, referred to the Integrity Commission and said that all of them need to go and present themselves to the Integrity Commission. And those that didn't do that had to undergo a disciplinary committee and process, and that process is happening now. So if I was implicated and I didn't present myself to the Integrity Commission to explain so that they make a finding about me, I now have to serve before the disciplinary committee and explain why did I defy the decision of the NEC to go to the Integrity Commission. So I think that those processes will be dealt with. And if people are found guilty through the ANC NDC processes, they will be removed from the list.
And now the narrative of ANC having old people?
Yeah.
What's...
I think that on this list, we certainly have done much better in terms of bringing in young people. We have, I think the figure for over 25% of people are under the age of 40 on our list. We have quite a number of young people that's even under 30, which I think is good. Because you're bringing in more energy, you're bringing a young voice into Parliament. And then you have the next generation that's, between 40 and 55. And that's in fact the bulk of our members of Parliament or candidates, as well as in the provinces. In fact, this time around, people over the age of 60 is a very small part. The President, Comrade Naledi Pandor. We also have a couple of veterans on the list, but it's certainly a very small percentage of our overall list. So the ANC candidate list is certainly much younger, and a good blend of people under 55 with experience in government. Some of them have served for 2 terms already as ministers, even though they may be in their early 40s. And then we have those young people under 30 that I think certainly will bring a sense of energy and urgency about what we need to do in the next 5 years.
Going into the next priority.
Yeah.
The high cost of living.
Yeah.
What's ANC going to do in the next election to try and make life a bit more affordable?
Yeah. I mean, I think that part of what we planning to do in the manifesto, and therefore in the coming 5 years, is to look at how do you address the key drivers of the cost of living, and that tend to be food, because most of us spend money on food, and particularly the majority of people, low-income people, spend most of their budget on food, transport. And then it's the, electricity, water, and those kind of things. And already there is what we call a social wage. And this is why the national health insurance is important. Because at the moment, working people spend exorbitant amount of money on medical aid. Small businesses spend, as part of their wage bill, medical aid is a large part of their medical, with the health insurance giving a minimum package to everybody that covers everybody. It means that you will then spend less on medical aid, and it means there's more money in your pocket, because medical aid, you are covered for a basic minimum, and you then do a top-up. Your medical aid is basically a top-up. So I think that those are part of addressing the cost of living. The second one is that about over 80% of our schools in the country are no-fee schools, which means that parents don't have to pop out money to pay for school fees. They just have to look after the uniform and making sure that the kids are fed. There's scholar transport. One of the difficult issues that we have that we will have to look at as a country is the question about, the cost of fuel and petrol, because that has knock-on effects on everything, on transport, getting to work, on transport of goods, on transport of agricultural products, etc. And there's 2 ways that we need to address it. One of them is to look at where do we get our fuel from. Nigeria has just, Dangote has just announced that they're building a refinery. We import our fuel from the Middle East. But Angola, our neighbor, has oil, and they're building refineries. So in a sense, we need to look at the long term, the next 10, 15 years, and say that isn't there ways of getting fuel cheaper? That's also not so subject to the volatility of what's happening quite a distance away from us. So that's part of what we need to do, but also invest in electric vehicles. There's discussion as part of the automotive master plan about how do we build capacity for ensuring that we invest in electric vehicles. But most importantly, public transport. Because, we've got so many cars on the road. It's not sustainable from an environmental and air pollution point of view. But also just, we need to invest in public transport, reliable, safe public transport, to be able to make sure that more people feel that they don't have to take their car to work. The expansion of the Gautrain, making sure that our country also look at high-speed rail, and the technology is there in the world between our cities. The bus rapid transport system in your metros that we're looking at expanding, and we've started it. So all of those are part of the cost of living. And then, of course, food inflation. And, we have in the last term of office since 2019 strengthened our competition laws. Because we've got monopolies in your agro-processing and food sector, it means that there's a lot of collusion. For example, during COVID on things like sugar, on cooking oil, on all sorts of different food things, the prices just went all of a sudden up. And when the Competition Commission investigate, it's not linked to anything to do with the, actual production costs. It's the fact that you've got 2, 3, 4 producers or retail stores that say, okay, your pal, you sit at dinner tables and on the golf course together, and you say that, this is what the price should be. So it's also about making sure that we're much more vigilant about monitoring prices. And over the last, year and year, if you look at the reports from Stats South Africa, food inflation is coming down slowly, not as fast as we like to. So tackling cost of living is really about addressing those key issues. And then the other part of priority 3 is also supporting incomes. And supporting incomes is about the social grants, making sure that the elderly have access to pensions, to decent pensions. It's about how do we support children through the child grant? How do we support people with disabilities so that they have proper care and access to assisted devices? But also, how do you support the unemployed people without it? And what we've said in our manifesto is that the SRD grant for the unemployed that we started, what does it stand for? Social relief distress grant. Okay. So remember, it was introduced during COVID. Yes. So that grant, we want to use it as a basis of the basic income support grant, so that every South Africa has a basic income, so that you don't have to go to bed hungry. It's a simple priority, which a country that says that it wants to be imbued with the spirit of Ubuntu and social justice should have. So that's part of what we have in terms of priority 3, tackling the cost of living and supporting incomes.
As part of priority 4, which I know you touched on it, 3,
yeah.
NHI,
yeah,
National Health Insurance.
Okay, so priority 4 is about meeting basic needs. It's firstly investing in people and meeting basic needs, and the two are very closely linked. The National Health Insurance, if you look at where we come from, since 1994, we've built about 1,700 clinics, mainly in previously disadvantaged areas. And in addition to that, we've also built 68 hospitals, also in disadvantaged areas, in districts where you didn't have it before. So we've expanded health to everybody. In 1994, one of the first things that President Nelson Mandela announced was free healthcare to children under the age of 5, as well as pregnant women. Because remember, at the time, women were dying in childbirth, especially black women. So by making healthcare freely available, you drastically reduce both maternal mortality as well as infant and child mortality. But the problem is that we have a 2-tier apartheid health system, because what happened is that we didn't have white people before 1990 had public health. They didn't use other health. They didn't use private health. They had free public health care. Okay. So what happened after, as the negotiations unfolded, you then started the development of private health and, medical aids, et cetera, et cetera. And what you see today is that 84% of South African population use the public health system. Even people on medical aid, if you run out of medical aid and you have an accident, they'll send you from wherever you go, your private clinic, to a public hospital because they say your medical aid has run out. Sorry, unless you pay upfront, we can't service you and you'll have to go to the public health system. So 84% of people use the public health system. 70% according to Stats SA, it's their first port of call. And but if you look at funding for health, South Africa spent quite a lot, by international standards on health. 8.5% of GDP is spent on health. But over 50% of that is spent on 15% of the population that use private health care.
Repeat that.
Okay, so our GDP, the percentage of GDP that we spend on health is 8.5%. But over 50% of that is spent on 15% of the population who's in private healthcare. And this is, it's clearly the reason why you have our healthcare system being so unequal. Because you have specialists and beds and doctors that are nurses that's underutilized in the private healthcare system. You go to the Minister of Health made the example the other day. You go to a public care hospital at 7:00 at night. All the nurses and doctors are doing their rounds because the public health system is fully utilized. You go to a private clinic. The nurses are sitting and doctors, because it's not properly and completely utilized. But in addition to that, what the NHI also will do is to say that, it will create a central fund that will cover this basic that all of us will be covered. So say, for example, you in a rural area and there is no speech therapist in the clinic that service that rural areas. But you do have a private speech therapist, but your poor families can't afford it because they don't have money for that. But if it's covered by the NHI can now contract that speech therapist, and it means that the person don't have to drive 100 kilometers to get speech therapy. That's how we introduce equal access to healthcare. Through that system. Also the National Health Fund, and the President said he will continue to engage with the private sector about it, will be set up both by public and private sector because it needs to fund all of us. Just let me use the example of during COVID.
Okay. During
COVID, we used all of the resources, health resources in our country, both public and private. But often you saw that the treatment was better in the public system. That people came from the private hospitals into the public system because the treatment was actually better because the public health system is used to dealing with large volumes of people. All of a sudden, your private clinics had 3-4 times the amount of patients that they normally have. They couldn't cope. And this is why people were transferred to that. The other example is, if you remember the George building collapse.
Yes.
So what happened is that people, they planned, the emergency services went out and they said, okay, the public hospitals, how many beds do we have? We have potentially so many people that needs care. In addition to that, how many capacity do we have in the private hospitals? Now, so that when the public beds are full, people can be referred to the private hospitals and the state pay for that. Now, at the moment, it's sort of like a gentleman's agreement. But under the NHI, that will be the norm, where we use all available health facilities to serve our people. And this is a global standard that you should ensure that your population have universal health coverage on the basis of available resources. So the approach towards implementing the NHI, which we started now that the Act is passed, is to be able to say, what are the basics that everybody will have? So you will still have medical aids because, you're progressively moving towards increasing the package of care under the NHI.
One of the big issues that's generally out there is the quality of the public health care. I have friends.
But it's a resource issue.
Yeah. So I have friends that, they're having a child and they would say, I don't want my wife or I don't want to give birth in a public hospital.
Yeah. But you still have the choice to under the NHI, to choose your hospital.
Okay.
The difference is that because the NHI will cover everybody, it just means that if I'm a worker and there's a public hospital 5 kilometers away from me, but my public hospital is 30 kilometers away. So in order to get treatment, I have to take off a day from work. It impacts on my productivity. But I can go under the NHI to the closest hospital, whether it's public or private. But the question about the quality of healthcare, I think it's an important issue in the public sector, in the public healthcare. Remember that statistic that I said that more than 50% of your health expenditure is spent on 15% of the population. Now that is if you have a much more equitable distribution, it means that you're able to make healthcare more affordable for everybody. And the reality is that the amount of money in the private healthcare system has introduced perverse practices. So, for example, cesareans. On average, only 20% of women need cesareans. In the private healthcare system, 80% of women get cesareans because, you pay for anaesthetist, you pay for a surgeon, you pay for staying in hospital for 7 days or 12 days because they want that money, because it's about profit. So it has introduced a lot of perverse incentives. Somebody is on a medical aid for 20 years. You get cancer. After 6 months, they say to you, you've got to start paying yourself for the treatment because of the cost of healthcare. So it will also help to bring the cost of healthcare down because of the economies of scale. Because at the moment, a few people can afford, say, for example, speech therapy. But now, if everybody that needs it means that your economies of scale means that will also get cheaper. The same with medicines. Because you're talking about economies of scale, it means that, more people can get access to medicines cheaper.
Okay. Due to time, we'll skip the priority 5.
Okay.
But priority 6, building a better Africa and world. What does that mean?
Yeah. I think it's an important one because in May, Africa Month, we're celebrating the anniversary of the formation of the OAU on 25 May 1963. So it's an important part of looking at where we are as a continent, because I think that the important thing for South Africa is that we don't exist in a vacuum. We are part of a broader continent. And if you look at economic development, in Asia, in Europe, in South America, North America, countries, when they talk about who's their main trading partner, they talk about the countries next to them. Germany trades, Poland, their main trading partner is Germany. The UK, their main trading partner are other European countries. In Asia, Vietnam, their main trading partner are other Asian countries. In Africa, our main trading partners are China or Europe or the US. So part of what we need to do is to make sure that we build through the African Continental Free Trade Area. We industrialize firstly, we develop our agriculture sector, we develop our infrastructure, and we begin to trade with each other. Because Africa, we're the only continent where the population is growing. By 2050, it's estimated that something like 1 out of every 2 working age person will be African. because we've got a growing population. Our population is young. We've got the land mass, etc. So it's very critical that we develop our continent. So the priority of a better Africa and a better world is really therefore about how do we make sure that we continue to develop our continent, and we've done quite a lot over the last 30 years, but also making sure that we build a better world. Because, we've seen it with COVID, that a pandemic that may have started in another part of the world, but it impacts on all of us. You can't close your border. Even if you try to close your border, you can't. Pandemics know no borders. If there is a conflict in anywhere in the world, you've got a conflict in Palestine now, it means that the Suez Canal can't be used. People are now transporting goods via the African continent. So our world is very interconnected. And this is why when we talk about a better world, we are talking about how do we ensure that it's a better world for everyone?
Okay. Now, on the 29th of May, what's your message to supporters, to South Africa, and youth in particular, as to why they should put that mark where they should?
I think that the main message on 29 May is that we should vote for the future. We should vote for our future that should be better than yesterday. And I think that the African National Congress present that. We have 30 years of experience. When we started in 1994, we had to reinvent government and delivery because you had a system for 342 years that excluded deliberately and underdeveloped the majority. We now have that experience. We've learned from our mistake and we have the ability to renew, but we also have a vision for the future. So we must vote for the future. But I think we must also vote for a party that can unite South Africa. The ANC has always been committed towards working together with everybody. Everybody else is very divisive. The ANC is the only party that says, when we talk about GBV, we must work together. When we talk about the NHI, we must work together. When we talk about fixing the economy, we must work together. I think that two of the important constituencies for me on 29 May are young people. Vote for your future. Vote for, making a difference and being part of the future and building our country and building our continent. But the second important constituency are women. Women, 55% of the registered voters. Democracy has meant freedom for women. And women are important builders of our country, of our communities, of political parties. They are leaders in their own right. And I think that this is why South Africans should vote their hopes and not their fears and vote for the African National Congress.
Thank you very much for making time for us.
Thank you.
Guys, I hope that's been insightful. Hope that you can make an informed decision come 29 May. But until then, please like, subscribe, share, follow, and tune in. Thank you. Palatable Politics.